The song that's important to me goes back in time, you won't be surprised to hear, and actually takes me back to Romania, where I spent some time during a gap year between school and university. Like my 2 teenage daughters who are here this evening, music was such a big part of my life. It framed everything. But before I go on to tell my story, I just want to acknowledge that I think telling people about a country that's not your own is a really big responsibility. And I'm not only telling you a bit about Romania as an outsider, but I'm also taking you back in time, really quite a long time ago. Because when I was in Romania, it was just after the fall of communism, and the country was recovering from an oppressive time under the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. For people of a certain age who remember that time, I think one of the things that Romania gained notoriety for was this flood of images that hit the media of children languishing in really neglectful conditions in a huge number of orphanages across the country. And it was those images that led to me going to Romania as a teenage volunteer keen to do something meaningful before I started university. And I was really surprised when I got there to meet Romanians who were as shocked as I had been by those images. And they told me that it was news to them. They had been living under a dictatorship. The information that had been given to them was manipulated. They'd been duped by propaganda. So they weren't only shocked and appalled, but they were really embarrassed and ashamed. So for many people, Romania is kind of frozen in time with this horrendous legacy of orphanages and lots of other things to do with economic and political recovery from a terrible time under communism. But it is so much more than that. It is a country that I absolutely love. I still work in today. I've made some effort to learn the language, and I've been so lucky to have Romanian friends who've educated me every step of the way to introduce me to its rich culture, cook me delicious food, serve me too much of its wine, and show me the mountains and the amazing verdant landscapes. So I just wanted to say before I tell my story that I'm going to introduce you to my 18-year-old self. And it may come as no surprise, she looked nothing like I do now. And similarly, Romania today looks nothing like the country it was all those years ago. So it's 1992. I've got a packed rucksack. Got a few cassettes in my side pockets. I've bragged to my friends that I'm going to save the world. My mum, who's also here today, very kindly equipped me with cookery skills so I wouldn't starve. And my dad had put between 2 postcards a $100 bill. One of the postcards showed its tawdry souvenir photo. The other one was a message from a relative I'd never met. But in the middle was $100 in case of emergencies. I thought I was totally prepared. And in order to, I didn't want to stand here and laugh at my naive teenage self, because actually I wasn't that naive. I was quite cool, I was quite mature. So I asked my mum for the letters that I'd sent home while I was away, so I could revisit my true self. And I've got some notes here. I can't decide if it's glasses on or glasses off. And what really shone out of those pages was this thrill of the adventure I was having. I was somewhere no one I knew had ever been before. I was filled with kind of vitalizing self-discovery of adult experiences that no one I knew could begin to understand. I was exhilarated by conquering local challenges, whether it was finding out which market sold particular produce, going there, trying to find it, discovering it wasn't there, but finding a canny workaround on the black market, or now we would have hot water for just 2 hours every other night, and there were 5 of us volunteers living in an apartment together, and we had to work out how we could make best use of this precious resource and watch Dallas and do all our washing and cleaning. And that was so exciting, writing home, talking about all these idiosyncrasies that I was becoming a dab hand at managing. And I was also massively fueled by the reason I was there. Having been through education and all the systems of school, suddenly I was somewhere with my own purpose. My purpose was to contribute to the lives of children who'd been abandoned into really abusive, unsafe care, I was part of a small team, and we were trying to come up with activities, creative things that would stimulate the children, would engage them, extend them, educate them, fill their days. And we would come up with all sorts of ideas of how we could make stuff with them using donated aid. For some reason, somebody had sent a box of false nails to an orphanage for 300 children. But they came in handy for this creative collage we did of dragons, talons. We had children making talons. We had children sticking on scales. We had others making great clouds of flames. And these colourful, vulgar monstrosities were put up on the walls of the unlit corridors where there was nothing else in sight to brighten the inside of the institution. I'd never felt as if I was making more of a difference. And I was so proud. The pride shone through in my letters, proud of my learning, of how people did things locally, and how I was using this to shape how I too behaved. I was clearly really fulfilled by the relationships I was forming with the children. They were so generous with their affection. Whenever we arrived, they would tumble out and grab onto us with really dirty hugs, and pick our pockets, and then follow us to the activity room where they would just bang on the door all day, longing to be in our company, longing to have things to do. And I was emboldened. Oh, I could take on the world with the admiration of my friends that was coming through their letters. I really was saving the world. And I belonged. I'd found my people, my team of fellow volunteers. We all shared the same commitment. We were all feeling like we were working on one shared cause. And many of my letters finished saying, I just can't tell you what an amazing time I'm having, and I don't want to come home. But in between those paragraphs of joy and excitement, I didn't shy away from talking about some of the conflicting feelings and experiences that I was having as well. I was infuriated by communism, by the legacy that it had left locally in terms of opportunities, choice, availability, the impact it had had on the people that I was getting to know. After a few drinks, they would often sing a version of Don't Worry, Be Happy by Bobby McFerrin, where they would change the lyrics to being a serenade to Ceausescu, saying, Don't worry, be happy, Iliescu is a communist. There was a feeling that nothing would change and a feeling of impotence that was really hard to be alongside. And although I loved being alongside the children, there were times of searing pain when I was brought face to face with their reality. These were kids who'd been abandoned by their families, some with very, very good reasons, some perhaps not. Some had siblings who had been kept at home, some saw their parents, some didn't. They had nothing, and they would scavenge what they couldn't find in my pockets. They would scavenge, they'd go out to the tips and rummage about and come back and show us their treasures. Might be a little torn out character from a cereal packet, a new friend in their pocket for the day. Or like magpies, something shiny that they had found broken on the tip. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario? A fetus. And I was scared. I was really scared because I was only 18 and the kids in this orphanage went up to 24 and the corridors were not lit. And those boys thought nothing of intimidating a blonde Inglezoika who didn't speak the language. And the violence between the children and between the carers who themselves mostly had been orphans in the past. Kids were hit for not standing in line, looking like they were not standing in line, looking like they were thinking they were not standing in line. And they would just cower as the stick rained down on them, and then, slightly more terrifyingly, just shrug it off. Grin, flick the V's, spit and walk off. It was so normal and so terrifying. And I also felt impotent. I mean, what real difference was I making? False nails and a dragon on the wall for a bit. But these were children's lives. This was a whole society that needed to rebuild itself. And in order to be really alongside my Romanian friends and colleagues, I also felt quite deceitful It was as if I was somehow denying my privilege and the opportunities that lay ahead for me in order to be in the same place as them. And I felt survivor's guilt. I could walk away. And I could leave these children who were, by months into my stay, calling me mum. And I was just going to go to university and abandon them again. But more prosaically, I was also really stifled. I was living in a small flat with 4 volunteers who were my partners when I cleaned my teeth, when I had my breakfast, when I went to work, when we went to the bar. We were with each other all the time. I was stifled and I was bored. We didn't have any money, but there also wasn't very much to do with it if you did have it. It was intense in my teenage mind. All those really amazing, brilliant things. And then quite dark, heavy stuff, which I had no expectation would be part of my year off. So I had to make space to work it all out. And I made space by volunteering to be the person who went to get the wine in the evenings. I would pull on my jacket, stick my Walkman in my ears, and I would run down the unlit stairs from the top of the apartment block to the bottom, and I would shoot out, jumping out of the last 3 into the cold night air, turn my face to the sky, breathe in the crisp coldness, the snowflakes, the stars, press play on my Walkman, and walk the 4.5-minute walk to the wine shop. And there, as the rather grumpy lady went to the back of the shop to find my bottle, I would rewind my cassette. And as I walked back to the apartment, bottle in hand, I'd listen to it again. And sometimes, because I wasn't quite ready to push all these uncomfortable feelings to one side and go back inside for fun time, wine time, I would treat myself to a third listen, and I would just sit on the broken bench outside the apartment in the cold and listen to the song again. And the song was Night Swimming by REM. And before we listen, I just have to say a bit more music geekery as a music therapist. Because Night Swimming wasn't actually one of my cassettes. I'd borrowed it from a mate. And it wasn't particularly significant as a song to me. But musically, it did something. It starts, I don't know if you know it, but it starts with kind of skeetering instruments trying to find their place. And it's really immediate. And that met my scattered mind that was blown with all these complicated thoughts. And then immediately there are strong piano chords that bring us into a major tonality. It's really grounding. It was really anchoring. It was like musical assurance that it would be okay. There's no chorus in the song. It's quite repetitive. It's quite perseverative. In some ways, that's quite supporting. It just held me in one place, that one place, as I tried to unpick the chaos in my mind. It also reflected a certain amount of feeling trapped. As I said, it was quite stifling living and working with a small team. And the melodic line's quite static. Michael Stipe's voice is quite quavering. It's a bit uncertain. But he's intoning. It's almost chant-like. There's a determination there. That determination I felt that I would get through my time and I would understand it and myself better. And the melody calls out and withdraws. And about 2.5 minutes in, Michael Stipe's voice cracks. There's a vulnerability there, a fragility that I connected with immediately. And the lyrics. I mean, I'm not that fussed about Night Swimming, but in there he says, I'm not sure all these people understand. I thought I knew you. I can't judge. Uncertainty and confusion, reiterating exactly how I felt. And the soundscape's quite simple, but there are strings which give a richness to the tonality, and there's an oboe which maybe gives a little bit of extra poignancy. I mean, it just held me as I unpicked my thoughts. And I unpicked my thoughts and made space and time for reflection that helped my year off not just be an anomaly in my incredibly privileged life that I then put behind me when I went on to do other things, but it meant that I took that experience and all my learning from it. And then 2 years later, when I was at university, I set up a charity which I still run today, providing training for caregivers all around the world who want to explore how they can use music to provide support and connection to children and adults in vulnerable situations. Thank you.